You know, there's a certain kind of silence that comes with being adopted. It's not a lonely silence and necessarily, but it's a quiet space where a lot of questions are supposed to live. People always expect you to be searching for something. They look at you with these sympathetic eyes and ask, "Don't you want to know where you came from? Don't you feel like a piece of the puzzle is missing?" For the longest time, my answer was a very simple, very firm no. I was adopted at birth. It was a closed adoption, which meant the door wasn't just shut, it was locked, and the key was tossed into the deep end of the ocean. Growing up, I liked it that way. I didn't feel like a puzzle with a missing piece. I felt like a whole person who just happened to start my story on page 2. My parents, the people who actually raised me, were my world. They were the ones who stayed up through the night when I had a fever, the ones who cheered the loudest at my graduations, and the ones who taught me what love actually looks like when it's put into practice every single day. But then there's my little sister. Now let's be clear, we aren't blood related. We were both adopted into the same family at different times. We grew up in the same house, shared the same snacks, and navigated the same teenage dramas, but our temperaments couldn't be more different if we tried. Lately, my sister has been, well, a hot mess is the polite way to put it. She's been going through this phase where she's obsessed with finding herself, and in her mind, that means excavating the past. She started digging into her own biological history, which is fine. Everyone handles their journey differently. But the problem is she couldn't just leave it at her own story. She decided she was on a mission to reunite all of us with our biological families, whether we wanted it or not. My brother and I, we both tried to tell her to back off. We told her we were happy that our family was right here in front of us and that we didn't need to go looking for ghosts. I remember sitting in the kitchen with her one afternoon, the sun hitting the table just right, and she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. She had her laptop open, tabs upon tabs of genealogy sites and social media profiles. She looked at me with this frantic, wild-eyed intensity and said, "Don't you get it? We have a right to know. There's a whole other life out there for us." I just shook my head and told her that the life I had was plenty for me. I didn't need a sequel to a story I never even read. I thought that was the end of it. I thought she'd respect my boundaries. But my sister has always had a way of thinking she knows what's best for everyone else, even when she's barely keeping her own life on the tracks. Without telling me, without asking for even a second of my input, she went behind my back. She tracked down my biological mother. I don't even want to know how she did it. Private investigators, social media sleuthing, or just sheer chaotic determination. But she found her. And then she did the unthinkable. She gave that woman my personal phone number. The first text came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work just trying to get through a pile of emails when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. Usually, I'd ignore it thinking it was just another scam call about my car's extended warranty. But something about the area code caught my eye. It was from a town I'd never visited, but a town I knew was listed on my original paperwork. My heart did this weird heavy thud in my chest. I opened the message and my stomach dropped through the floor. "Hi, I don't know if you're ready for this, but I'm your mother. Your sister gave me your number. I've thought about you every day for all these years." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed and it went black. My breath felt shallow. It wasn't a sense of relief or a missing piece finally clicking into place. It was a feeling of intrusion. It felt like someone had broken into my house and was sitting on my couch acting like they belonged there. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I put the phone face down and tried to focus on my work, but the words kept echoing in my head. "I'm your mother." Over the next few days, more messages followed. It was like a dam had broken. She sent photos of her other kids, my biological siblings. Some were older than me, some were younger. That was the part that really started to gnaw at me. She had kept them. For some reason, I was the one who was given away while the others got to stay. I'd always had my theories. Maybe I was the result of an affair. Maybe she had a new boyfriend who didn't want a baby. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. From what I could gather from her social media, which I'll admit I looked at in a moment of weakness, most of her kids seemed to have different fathers. It looked like a chaotic revolving door of a life. I didn't judge her for that, but it confirmed one thing: I didn't belong in that world. I never had. The messages she sent were filled with this thick, sugary sentimentality. She called me sweetie and my long-lost girl. She talked about how fate had finally brought us back together. It felt performative, like she was reading from a script of what she thought a reunited mother was supposed to say. She never once asked me how I was or what my life had been like, or if I was even okay with her contacting me. It was all about her feelings, her regret, her mother's heart. I stayed guarded. I gave short, polite answers when I finally did reply, mostly just to keep the peace, and because a part of me was curious to see where this was going. I figured maybe after all these years, she just wanted to apologize. Maybe she wanted to give me some medical history or explain why things happened the way they did. I was prepared for a lot of things. I was prepared for tears, for awkwardness, for a long-winded explanation of her life's struggles, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. After about a week of this buttering up, after she had spent days telling me how much she loved me and how she had never stopped praying for this moment, the mask finally slipped. We were in the middle of a text conversation where she was complaining about her car breaking down and how hard things had been lately with the younger kids. Then the drumroll moment happened. She didn't ask for a meeting. She didn't ask for a phone call to hear my voice. She asked me for money. I sat there looking at the text and I actually started laughing. It was so absurd, so stereotypical that I couldn't even be angry at first. It was just pure, unadulterated shock. She had spent 20-something years not knowing my name, not knowing my face, and not contributing a single cent to my upbringing. And yet here she was, less than 7 days after making contact, treating me like a bank account with a pulse. I know it's a lot to ask, she wrote, but I'm your mother. We're family and family helps each other out when things get tough. I'm just so short this month and I don't know who else to turn to. I'm your mother. Those 3 words hit me differently this time. Before they felt like an intrusion, now they felt like an insult. I looked around my apartment, the life I had built, the furniture I had paid, for the stability I had earned through hard work, and the support of the parents who actually raised me. And I realized right then that the mother who was texting me didn't know the first thing about me. I sat there for a long time just staring at my phone as the screen timed out and went black again. My reflection stared back at me and I looked different. Or maybe the world just felt different. The audacity of it was like a physical weight in the room. I've always been someone who values boundaries, someone who believes that respect is earned and not just granted because of a shared DNA sequence. But this was on another level. This woman who hadn't been there for a single scraped knee, a single heartbreak, or a single victory was trying to cash in a check she had never deposited any money into. I decided right then that I wasn't going to let this sit. I didn't reply to her immediately. I needed to deal with the person who had opened this Pandora's box in the first place. I called my sister. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sounding small and tentative. "Hey," she said. She knew. She had to know. "What were you thinking?" I didn't yell. My voice was low vibrating, with a cold kind of anger that I rarely felt. "You had no right. We talked about this. I told you I didn't want this. I told you I was done with that part of my life before it even started. I thought if you saw her, if you talked to her, you'd see why it was important." She started, her voice hitching. "I found my bio mom, and it was healing for me. I wanted that for you too. I didn't want you to have these unanswered questions forever." "I didn't have questions," I snapped. "The only question I have now is how you could be so incredibly selfish. You didn't do this for me. You did this because you couldn't stand the fact that I'm okay with being adopted. You needed me to be as broken or as searching as you are so you wouldn't feel alone in it. And now she's texting me asking for money. Is that the healing you wanted from me? Being treated like an ATM by a stranger who happened to give birth to me?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing a shaky, uneven sound. "She asked for money?" she whispered. "Yes, she spent a week telling me how much she loved me and then hit me with a bill for her life's mistakes. You gave my personal information to someone who views me as a resource, not a daughter. You violated my privacy and my peace." I hung up before she could apologize. I knew her apologies would be empty. She'd do it again if she thought it would serve her emotional narrative, but I couldn't focus on her for long because my phone buzzed again. It was another message from the woman who called herself my mother. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I really am desperate. I thought since you're doing so well, you might want to help your brothers and sisters. They're your flesh and blood. Don't they deserve a chance?" The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. She was using the siblings I didn't know as a shield. She was trying to paint me as the villain, the successful one who had turned her back on her struggling family. It's funny how people who have never been there for you are the first ones to tell you what you owe to family. I started thinking about the woman I actually call mom. I thought about the time I was 7 years old and I had a nightmare about being lost in a grocery store. I remember waking up crying, my heart racing, and within seconds she was there. She didn't just tell me to go back to sleep, she sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back until my breathing slowed down. She told me, "You are never lost as long as you know I'm right here." She was the one who went to every single parent-teacher conference, even when she was exhausted from work. She was the one who helped me move into my first apartment, staying late to help me scrub the floors because she wanted to make sure I was safe and clean. That woman, my real mother, never asked me for a dime. She never made me feel like I owed her for the years of sacrifice she put in. She gave because she loved me, not because she was waiting for a return on her investment. I looked back at the text on my screen. "I'm your mother." I felt a surge of protectiveness over the word mother. It felt like this stranger was trying to steal a title she hadn't earned. It's a sacred word. It's a word built out of thousands of small moments, changing diapers, packing lunches, holding hands across a hospital bed, cheering from the sidelines of a soccer game in the pouring rain. You don't get to claim that title just because of a biological event that happened decades ago. I decided to finally type back. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to be mean. I wanted to tell her exactly how pathetic I thought she was. I wanted to list all the reasons why she meant absolutely nothing to me. But I realized that giving her that much emotion was still giving her power. Instead, I wrote, "You are not my mother. You are a biological relative that I do not know. I do not owe you anything and I will not be sending you money. Please do not contact me again." I hit send and felt a brief moment of triumph. I blocked the number immediately after. I didn't want to see her response. I didn't want to see the guilt trips or the insults that I knew were coming. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I had closed the door again, tighter this time. But I had forgotten about the power of the internet and the persistence of someone who thinks they've found a way out of their financial problems. A few hours later, I got a notification on Facebook. Someone had commented on one of my public photos. It was an account I didn't recognize, but the profile picture was unmistakable. It was her. She was wearing a forced smile surrounded by 3 kids who looked tired and unkempt. The comment read, "Must be nice to live such a fancy life while your own mother and siblings are starving. I guess some people forget where they came from once they get a little bit of money." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just a private text anymore. She was taking it public. She was trying to shame me in front of my friends, my colleagues, and my community. She was trying to weaponize my adoption against me, painting me as the cold-hearted child who had abandoned her real family. I felt a wave of nausea. This was exactly why I had never wanted to look. This was the chaos I had spent my entire life avoiding. I looked at the comments section, waiting for the inevitable questions from my friends. The "who is this?" or the "is this true?" I felt like I was being stripped bare in the middle of a crowded street. I took a deep breath and realized I had 2 choices. I could delete the comment and block her and hide, or I could stand my ground. I realized that if I hid, I was letting her define the narrative. I was letting her "I'm your mother" claim hang in the air like a fact. I didn't delete it, not yet. First I took a screenshot. Then I replied directly to her comment for everyone to see. "I was adopted at birth," I wrote. "The woman who raised me is my mother. I have never met you, and you have had no part in my life for over 20 years, contacting me for the first time just to ask for money and then publicly harassing me when I said no is not what a mother does. Please leave me alone." I blocked that account too, and then I set all my profiles to private. I sat back, my hands shaking slightly. I felt like I had just survived a physical fight. I felt raw and exposed, but also relieved. For the first time, I had articulated exactly what the difference was between biology and family. But then the messages started coming from other people. Not from her, but from the siblings. One of my brothers sent me a DM. He was older, maybe in his late 20s. His message wasn't like hers. It wasn't a demand or a guilt trip. "Hey, it started. I saw what happened on Facebook. I'm sorry about her. She's a lot, but you shouldn't listen to everything she says. There's a reason you were given away, and it's not what she's telling you." My heart stopped. I had always had my theories, the affair baby, the new boyfriend, but hearing someone from the inside imply there was a specific reason felt like a punch to the gut. Part of me wanted to delete the message and keep running, but another part of me, the part that had been quiet for 20 years, suddenly needed to know. I stared at that message from Leo, my thumb hovering over the delete button, but I couldn't do it. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. For 20 years, I'd convinced myself that I didn't care about the why. I had built a fortress around my life, telling myself that the beginning of my story didn't matter because the middle and the end were so good. But hearing from someone who had actually lived in the house I was supposed to grow up in, it changed things. It made the shadow of that other life feel real tactile, and suddenly, very close. I typed back, my hands trembling. "What do you mean? Why was I given away when the rest of you stayed?" I waited. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared, then appeared again. Every second felt like an hour. I walked over to my window and looked out at the street. It was a normal Tuesday evening. People were walking their dogs, cars were turning into driveways, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. My life looked so normal from the outside, but inside I felt like I was being pulled apart. Finally, Leo's reply came through. It was a long one. "Look," he started, "our mother, if you even want to call her that, she's not a stable person. She never has been. You were the 3rd child. I'm the oldest. When you were born, things were really bad with your dad. He wasn't like the other guys she was with. He actually wanted to be a father. He wanted to take you and give you a real life, but she didn't want him to have that power over her. She knew if he had you, he'd always have a reason to be in her business, so she did the one thing she knew would hurt him the most. She gave you up for a closed adoption before he could even file the paperwork to claim you. She didn't do it because she couldn't afford you. She did it out of spite." I felt the air leave my lungs. All these years I had imagined 100 different scenarios. I'd imagined a young woman, and over her head, a woman who loved me enough to let me go, or even a woman who was just too lost to care. But the idea that my entire life had been redirected because of a grudge, that I was a pawn in a game of emotional chess before I could even open my eyes, it was a lot to take in. It made the "I'm your mother" text feel even more sinister. She hadn't just given me away, she had used me as a weapon, and now 20 years later she was trying to use me as a paycheck. "Does he know where I am?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "No," Leo replied. "He passed away about 5 years ago. He never stopped looking for you though. He had investigators and everything, but with a closed adoption. Back then, it was nearly impossible. She used to laugh about it. She'd wait until he was really struggling and then remind him that his daughter was out there somewhere calling another man daddy. She's a piece of work, truly. When she found out your sister was looking for her, she saw it as a winning lottery ticket. She thinks you've got money because of the way you look in your photos. She thinks you're her retirement plan." I put the phone down and walked into my bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, searching for traces of a man. I'd never met a father who had actually wanted me. I wondered if I had his eyes or his stubborn chin. I wondered if he would have been proud of the person I'd become. A wave of grief hit me, not for the mother I didn't have, but for the father I was never allowed to know. And the woman responsible for that loss was the one currently blowing up my Facebook feed with claims of family loyalty. I felt a sudden, sharp need to talk to my real parents. Not the biological ones, but the ones who had been there through the chickenpox, the broken hearts, and the college applications. I called my mom, my real mom. "Hey honey," she said as soon as she picked up. Her voice was like a warm blanket. "You sound tired. Is everything okay?" I hesitated. My parents knew I was adopted, obviously, and they had always been open to talking about it, but I had never wanted to. I didn't want them to think for a second that they weren't enough. But I needed her right now. I needed the grounding force of her love to stop the world from spinning. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "My sister, she gave my number to my biological mother, and things are getting really messy." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We talked to her, your father and I. We told her to leave it alone, but she's in a headspace right now where she isn't listening to anyone. Are you okay? Did she say something to hurt you?" She asked me for money, Mom. After a week of texting me, she asked for money. And then she went on my Facebook and started telling everyone I'm a terrible daughter. She did what my mother's voice went from concerned to fiercely protective in a heartbeat. "You listen to me. That woman has no right to you, not a single right. You are our daughter. You are a part of this family by choice and by love, and that is 1,000 times stronger than blood. Do not let her get under your skin. She is a stranger who is trying to take advantage of a connection she doesn't understand." "I know," I whispered, feeling the tears finally start to fall. "It's just, I found out why she gave me up. It wasn't because she couldn't take care of me. It was to hurt my biological father. He wanted me, Mom. He spent his whole life looking for me, and she hid me from him just to be cruel." Silence stretched over the line for a moment. I could almost hear my mother's heart breaking for me. "I'm so sorry, honey. I wish we could have known. We always wondered, you know. We hoped it was a situation where she just wanted a better life for you, because that's what we wanted to believe. But regardless of her reasons, I want you to remember something. You weren't just a pawn to us. From the second they put you in our arms, you were the center of our universe. You weren't a weapon or a mistake or a paycheck. You were our daughter." Talking to her helped, but the anger toward my sister was still simmering under the surface. It wasn't just that she had contacted the biomom. It was that she had been so reckless with my life. She had treated my history like a hobby, something to poke and prod at for her own entertainment without any regard for the consequences. I decided I needed to see her. I couldn't do this over the phone anymore. I drove over to her apartment, my grip tight on the steering wheel. I needed her to understand the damage she had done. I needed her to see that her healing journey had set my life on fire. When she opened the door, she looked awful. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her hair was a mess. She looked like she had been crying for hours. For a split second, I felt a twinge of pity, but then I remembered the "I'm your mother" comments on my Facebook and the story of my father who died searching for me. The pity vanished. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice cold. She stepped aside, nodding slowly. "I'm so sorry," she started as soon as the door closed. "I didn't know she was like that. I thought it would be like it was for me. My biomom was so happy to see me. She's been so sweet." "Your biomom is a different person, Sarah," I snapped. "You can't just project your experience onto everyone else. You didn't do any research. You didn't ask me what I wanted. You just handed over my life to a woman who is currently trying to ruin my reputation because I won't give her $1,000. "I thought I was helping," she sobbed, sinking onto her couch. "I thought if we all found our families, we'd finally feel whole, like we weren't just these leftover kids." "I never felt like a leftover kid until you started this," I yelled. "I was whole. I was happy. I had a family. You're the one who feels like something is missing, Sarah. And instead of dealing with that in therapy, you tried to fix it by breaking into my life. Do you have any idea what she's done? Do you know she gave me away just to spite a man who loved me? Do you know he's dead now? I'll never get to meet him because of her, and I'd never even have known that if you hadn't invited this monster back into my world." Sarah looked up at me, her face pale. He's dead." "Yes, and she's using my biological siblings' kids who are probably suffering because of her as a guilt trip to get my money. This is the gift you gave me." I stood there watching her crumble, and I realized that being angry at her wasn't going to fix anything. She was a hot mess for a reason. She was searching for something that biology could never give her, a sense of belonging that she was too blind to see was already right there in the home we grew up in. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't look. I almost threw the thing against the wall, but I checked it anyway. It wasn't a text. It was an email notification. Subject line, "Regarding your biological father." It was from Leo. My hand froze on the doorknob. The cold metal felt like an anchor keeping me grounded while the rest of the world seemed to be spinning out of control. I looked back at Sarah, who was still slumped on her couch, a pathetic figure of regret and smeared mascara. I wanted to show her the email. I wanted to rub her face in the reality of what she'd unearthed, but a part of me, a protective private part, felt like this was something I had to face alone. This wasn't her story anymore. It never should have been. I walked out of her apartment without another word, the hallway smelling faintly of burnt toast and old carpet. I didn't get back in my car right away. I sat on the concrete steps of the building, the evening air turning crisp and biting. My breath hitched as I pulled up the email. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitant to invite more ghosts into my life. But I had to know. I had to know who that man was, the one who had wanted me, the one who had been erased from my history by a woman's spite. The email from Leo was long, filled with attachments. There were scanned documents, a few grainy photographs, and a short message that read, "I found these in a box she kept hidden in the back of the closet. She always told us our dads were losers who ran away, but I found his letters. He never stopped trying, even when the legal walls were too high to climb. I thought you should see the man she tried to make you forget." I clicked on the first photo. It was a Polaroid, the edges yellowed with age and slightly curled. In it, a man in his early 20s was leaning against an old truck. He had thick dark hair and a lopsided grin that looked hauntingly familiar. I looked at his eyes, deep set and kind, and I saw my own reflection. It was a physical jolt, like looking into a mirror that showed me a version of myself from another lifetime. This wasn't the chaotic, desperate world of the woman who is currently harassing me for money. This man looked solid. He looked like someone who could have been a father. I scrolled through the other attachments. There were copies of court filings, petitions for custody letters from lawyers, and even a handwritten note addressed to the adoption agency. "I am the father," it said in bold, steady handwriting. "I did not consent to this. I want my daughter. I have a job, I have a home, and I have a family ready to welcome her. Please do not take her away from me." The date on the letter was just 2 weeks after I was born. The weight of it hit me all at once. For my entire life, I had assumed I was unwanted. Even if I was happy with my adoptive parents, there was always that quiet, underlying assumption that the people who made me didn't have room for me. To find out that wasn't true, to find out that I was fought for, that I was missed, and that I was the subject of a decade-long search, it broke something inside me. It made the bio-mom's "I'm your mother" claims feel like a violent act. She hadn't just given me away, she had stolen a father from a child and a child from a father. As I sat there on the steps, my phone started vibrating again. I expected it to be another text from her, or maybe another Facebook notification. But it was a call from an unknown number. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but after everything I'd learned in the last hour, my nerves were raw. I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding thin. "Is this her?" A voice hissed on the other end. It was her, the mother. Her voice wasn't the sweet performative tone she'd used in the first few texts. It was sharp, jagged, and fueled by a desperate kind of anger. Is this the girl who thinks she's too good for her own people? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just listened to the sound of her breathing, a ragged, wet sound that made my skin crawl. "I saw what you wrote on Facebook," she continued, her voice rising. "You think you're so smart? You think those people who bought you are your real family? They're strangers who paid for a baby because they couldn't make their own. I'm the one who carried you. I'm the one who went through the pain. And you're going to sit there in your nice house and tell me you don't owe me. After everything I went through because of you. Because of me. I finally found my voice, and it was steadier than I expected. You didn't go through anything because of me. You used me. You used me to hurt a man who actually cared about me. I know the truth now. I know about my father. I know he wanted me, and I know you gave me away just to make sure he couldn't have me." There was a sudden sharp silence on the other end. I had struck a nerve. The bravado vanished for a second, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. "Leo?" She spat the name, sounding like a curse. "That boy always had a big mouth. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Your father was a nobody. He wouldn't have given you the life you have now. I did you a favor. You didn't do it for me." I said, the tears starting to blur my vision. "You did it for yourself, and now you're calling me for money? You're trying to sell me a relationship that you destroyed 20 years ago. You aren't a mother. You're a kidnapper who got the state to do the paperwork for you. Listen to me, you ungrateful little—" She started, but I didn't let her finish. I hung up. I blocked the number immediately. I sat there in the dark, my heart racing, feeling like I was covered in soot. Everything about her felt dirty. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, dignified grief I felt when I looked at the photos of my father. I realized then that my sister Sarah, in her hot mess of a search, had accidentally handed me a tragedy I never asked for. She wanted a Hallmark movie reunion, but she had delivered me right back into the hands of the person who had orchestrated my loss. I drove home in a daze. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw the lights on in my living room. My real parents were inside. I could see my dad sitting in his favorite chair reading a book, and my mom walking past the window with a basket of laundry. The sight of them, so normal and so constant, made me want to collapse. They had no idea about the storm that was brewing. They had no idea that the woman who gave me to them was currently trying to tear down the life they had built for me. I walked inside, and the smell of home hit me, lavender laundry detergent, and the faint scent of the tea my mom drinks every night. It was the smell of safety. "Hey, honey," my dad said, looking up from his book. He took one look at my face and set the book down. "What's wrong?" I sat down on the ottoman in front of him, my hands still shaking. "I talked to her," I whispered, "and I talked to my biological brother. I found out why I was adopted." My mom came into the room, setting the laundry basket down and sitting on the sofa next to me. She took my hand, her skin warm and familiar. "Tell us," she said softly. I told them everything. I told them about the money, the Facebook comments, and the letters from my biological father. I told them about the man who had fought for me and the woman who had used me as a weapon. As I spoke, I saw the pain in their eyes, not for themselves, but for me. They had always known there was a story behind my adoption, but they had never known the depths of the cruelty involved. We always wondered, my dad said, his voice thick with emotion. When we went through the agency, they told us the father wasn't in the picture. They said it was a voluntary surrender from a mother who couldn't provide. If we had known there was a father who wanted you, God, honey, we would have helped him if we could. We just wanted a child to love. We never wanted to be part of something like that. "I know," I said, squeezing my mom's hand. "I know you didn't. This isn't on you. None of it is. But she's coming after me now. She's trying to make me look like the bad guy to everyone I know." "Let her try," my mom said, her voice hardening with a protective edge I'd only seen a few times in my life. "Let her say whatever she wants. People who know you, people who love you, they know the truth. And as for the money, she won't get a cent. We'll get a lawyer if we have to. We'll file a restraining order for harassment. You are not alone in this." That night I didn't sleep much. I kept looking at the photo of the man with the lopsided grin. I wondered what my life would have been like if he had won. Would I be the same person? Would I have the same dreams? It was a rabbit hole of what-ifs that led nowhere. But then I looked around my room at the photos of my childhood, the trophies from my high school debate team, the graduation cap hanging on the wall. That man might have wanted me, but these people, the ones in the other room, they were the ones who had shaped me. They were the ones who had turned a biological event into a life. But the biological mother wasn't done. The next morning I woke up to a flurry of notifications. She hadn't just stayed on my Facebook page, she had found the website for the small marketing firm where I worked. She had gone to the team page and found my professional email, and she had sent a mass message to my boss and my colleagues. The subject line was, "The real face of your employee." I woke up to a cold sinking feeling in my gut before I even reached for my phone. It's that sixth sense you get when you know the floor has dropped out from under you. When I finally gathered the courage to check my notifications, my heart didn't just race. It felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. There it was, an email forwarded to me by my boss, Mark, with a brief concern note that just said, "Can we talk in my office as soon as you get in?" I opened the attachment. The email the biological mother had sent was a masterpiece of toxic manipulation. She had taken photos from my public social media, the ones where I was on vacation, or out at a nice dinner, and juxtaposed them with blurry, heartbreaking photos of the younger kids I'd never met. She wrote about how I was a high-earning professional who watched my own flesh and blood starve. She called me cold calculating and claimed that I had abandoned her in her time of need after she had made the ultimate sacrifice to give me a better life. She even hinted that my professional success was a sham because I lacked basic human empathy. I felt like I was going to throw up. My workplace was small, tight-knit, and professional. I had worked so hard to build a reputation there as someone reliable, steady, and kind. And in one single unhinged blast, she had turned my private trauma into water cooler gossip. I felt exposed, like the walls of my office had suddenly turned to glass. The drive to work was a blur. I felt like I was moving through waist-deep water. When I walked through the front doors, I kept my head down, but I could swear I felt the eyes of the receptionist on me. Did she know? Had Mark shared it with everyone? The air in the office felt thick and suffocating. I knocked on Mark's door, my knuckles rapping against the wood with a hollow sound. He looked up, and to my immense relief, his expression wasn't one of judgment, but of deep, weary sympathy. "Sit down," he said softly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He closed the door, and the silence of the room felt like a sanctuary. "I'm going to guess you know what this is about." "I am so sorry, Mark." I started, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. I never wanted this to touch the office. It's a biological relative. I was adopted at birth, and she's recently made contact, and she's been asking for money. When I said no, she started this. Mark held up a hand to stop me. "You don't have to apologize. I've been in this business a long time, and I've seen all kinds of crazy. I'm not interested in your family drama, but I'm interested in your safety. This woman sounds unstable. She's reached out to 3 other senior partners as well." My heart stopped. "The partners, oh my God." "They had the same reaction I did," Mark said, his voice firm. "They were appalled not by you, but by her. It's a blatant attempt at extortion and character assassination. Our IT department has already blocked her email address and her IP from the company server. But I wanted to check in with you. Do you need to take some time? Do you need us to involve legal teto?" I felt a massive wave of relief, but beneath it, the anger was crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. "No, I don't need time. I need to handle this. I'm sorry she bothered the partners." "Don't be," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "But just a piece of advice, people like this thrive on a lack of boundaries. They count on you being too embarrassed to fight back. Don't be embarrassed. You didn't do anything wrong. She's the one who should be ashamed." I left his office with a renewed sense of purpose. The embarrassment was still there, a hot prickle at the back of my neck, but the fear had been replaced by a cold clinical need to end this. I went to my desk and did something I should have done days ago. I started a paper trail. I saved every text, every Facebook comment, and the workplace email into a single folder. I contacted a lawyer. My parents recommended a woman named Claire who specialized in harassment and family law. But before I could even get an appointment, the hot mess that started this all my sister, Sarah, showed up at my office building. I saw her through the glass partitions of the lobby, pacing back and forth, looking like she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I went down to meet her, not wanting her to make a scene in front of my coworkers. "What now, Sarah?" I asked as soon as I stepped outside. "She's calling me," Sarah sobbed, her hands shaking as she held her phone. "Our bio mom. She's screaming at me saying, 'It's my fault you're being difficult.' She told me that if I don't convince you to help her, she's going to tell everyone about my past." I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and for the first time I felt a deep sense of clarity. Sarah had her own demon struggles with substances in her early 20s, a string of bad relationships, things she was deeply ashamed of. The biological mother had figured that out within days and was now using the same tactics on her that she was using on me. "She's blackmailing you," I said flatly. "She says she'll call mom and dad and tell them everything I've been hiding," Sarah wailed. "She says she'll post it online. I just wanted us to be a family and now everything is falling apart." "Sarah, listen to me," I said, grabbing her by the shoulders. "She can't tell mom and dad anything they don't already know. They love you. They've always loved you even through the messy parts. You gave this woman a weapon and now she's using it on you because she can't get to me. You need to block her, right now, in front of me." "But what if she—" "There is no what if. There is only the fact that she is a predator," I snapped. "She doesn't care about you and she doesn't care about me. She cares about what she can get from us. Block her or I am walking away from you too." Sarah, trembling, pulled out her phone and hit the block button. She collapsed into my arms, crying into my shoulder. As I held her, I realized that Sarah wasn't a villain. She was just a very lost, very hurt person who had tried to find a shortcut to wholeness. But in doing so, she had led a wolf right to our door. I took Sarah to a coffee shop nearby to calm her down. While she sipped a latte and stared blankly out the window, I pulled out my phone and checked my email again. There was a new message from Leo, the biological brother. "Hey," it read, "I saw what she did at your work. One of the cousins told me she was bragging about it on a private group chat. I'm so sorry. I've talked to the others, the siblings, who are still living with her or near her. We're tired of it too. We've lived with her chaos our whole lives. If you're going to take legal action, we'll back you up. We have years of proof of her doing stuff like this to people. You're not the first person she's tried to squeeze for money, but you're the first one who has enough of a life for her to actually threaten." He attached more documents. Police reports from years ago, records of restraining orders filed by ex-boyfriends, and even a statement from a local charity she had tried to defraud. It was a pattern, a long, ugly pattern of a woman who viewed the world as a series of targets. Seeing the sheer volume of her history made me feel a strange sense of peace. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. It wasn't about the adoption or the abandonment, or even the father she had spitefully hidden. It was just who she was. She was a person who consumed everything in her path. I realized then that the most powerful thing I could do wasn't to argue with her or to plead with her or even to explain myself. It was to become a wall, a solid, immovable object that her waves of chaos would just break against. I looked at Sarah. "I'm going to the police and then I'm going to the lawyer. I'm filing for a restraining order. And I'm going to include the evidence Leo sent me. Are you okay with that? Because your name might come up as the person who initiated contact." Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded. "Do it. I don't care anymore. I just want her to go away. I just want things to be the way they were before." "They won't ever be exactly the way they were before," I said softly. "But they can be better, because now we know exactly who we are and who we aren't." I spent the rest of the afternoon in a whirlwind of paperwork. I felt like a soldier fortifying a position. I sent the files to Claire the lawyer, and she was already drafting a cease and desist letter that would make most people's blood run cold. She told me that with the evidence of workplace harassment and attempted extortion, a restraining order would be a slam dunk. As I drove home that evening, the sun was setting again, but the sky didn't look bruised this time. It looked clear. I thought about the man in the Polaroid, my biological father. I thought about how he had fought the system for years only to lose. I realized that by standing up to this woman now, I was doing what he never could. I was finishing the fight. I was protecting the daughter he had loved from the woman who had tried to erase him. I pulled into my driveway and saw my parents waiting for me on the porch. They had heard about the office email Mark had called my dad a gesture of friendship from one old professional to another. They didn't look scared. They looked ready. "We're with you," my dad said as I stepped out of the car. "Whatever it takes." But just as I was about to walk up the steps, a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. The engine idled loudly, a beat-up sedan that had seen better decades. The window rolled down slowly, and for the first time in my life, I saw her in person. She didn't look like the monster. She just looked tired gray and incredibly small. But when she spoke, the voice was unmistakable. "You think you're so safe in that big house, don't you?" She called out, her voice echoing in the quiet suburban street. The sound of that idling engine seemed to vibrate in my very bones. It was a low, ragged cough of a car, a stark contrast to the quiet, well-manicured suburban street I called home. I stood there frozen between my car and the porch, my keys biting into the palm of my hand. This was the moment every adopted child thinks about at least once, the moment the biological parent finally appears, but it wasn't a movie. There was no slow-motion embrace, no swelling music. There was just the smell of exhaust and the sight of a woman who looked like a hardened version of the face I saw in the mirror every morning. She leaned her head out of the window, squinting at the house, then at my parents, and finally at me. Her eyes were sharp, darting around like she was appraising the value of the siding and the lawn furniture. "So this is it," she said, her voice carrying across the yard with a jarring, gravelly edge. "This is where you've been hiding while your own family is out there struggling in the dirt." My father stepped off the porch. He didn't run, and he didn't yell. He walked down the stairs with a slow, measured dignity that made him seem twice his actual size. He stood between me and her car, his arms crossed over his chest. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said, his voice calm but layered with the steeliness I'd only heard a few times in my life. "And who are you?" she sneered, her lip curling. "The man who bought my daughter? You think a piece of paper makes her yours? I'm the one who gave her life. I'm the one who has the claim." "You don't have a claim on a person," my father replied. "You made a choice 20 years ago, and we made a choice too. We chose to love her, to provide for her, and to protect her. That hasn't changed. You are trespassing on private property and harassing a woman who has told you repeatedly to leave her alone. If you don't put that car in gear and drive away right now, the police will be here in 3 minutes. She laughed a harsh, dry sound. "The police, go ahead. Call them. Tell them a mother is trying to see her child. See how that looks in your precious little neighborhood." She turned her gaze back to me, ignoring my father entirely. "You really going to let him talk to me like that? After everything I told you? After the photos I sent you of your brothers? They're hungry, you know. They don't have the fancy shoes you're wearing. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Or are you just as cold as the people who raised you?" I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel the nausea or the fear. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. She was so small, not just in stature, but in spirit. She was standing in a world she didn't understand, trying to use weapons that had no power here. She thought guilt was a currency she could trade for a lifestyle she hadn't earned. "I'm not cold," I said, stepping out from behind my father. I wanted her to see me, really see me. "I'm just not yours. You keep saying I'm your mother, but you don't even know what that word means. You think it's about a biological debt, but it's not. It's about being there when the lights go out. It's about being the person who makes the world feel safe. You've done nothing but try to make my world feel dangerous since the moment you entered it." "I did what I had to do," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy, angry red. "You don't know what it was like. You don't know what that man would have done to me." "I know what he would have done for me," I countered, my voice rising for the first time. "He would have loved me. He would have fought for me. And you took that from both of us. You didn't give me away for a better life. You gave me away to win a fight. And now you're here because you lost the rest of the fights in your life and you think I'm the consolation prize. Well, I'm not. I am a person. I am a daughter to the man standing right here and the woman on that porch. And I am done being your victim." She stared at me, her mouth hanging open slightly. For a second, I thought she might actually get out of the car. I saw her hand grip the door handle and my father tensed, ready to move. But then she looked past me at the neighbors' houses. A few people had come out onto their porches, drawn by the shouting. She saw the eyes on her, the judgment of a community that knew me and didn't know her. She realized she didn't have an audience she could manipulate here. She wasn't the tragic hero of this story. She was the intruder. "Fine," she spat, slamming her hand against the steering wheel. "Keep your money. Keep your perfect life. But don't you come crying to me when you realize those people don't really love you. Blood always calls to blood, and one day you're going to wake up and realize you're all alone." She slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the asphalt as she backed out of the driveway. She sped down the street, the roar of her engine fading into the distance until the neighborhood was quiet once again. The silence that followed was heavy. My father turned to me, his face lined with worry. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my legs felt like they were made of jelly. "I think so. I think it's finally over." My mother came down from the porch, then wrapping her arms around me. She didn't say anything, she just held me. And in that embrace, the last of the tension seemed to drain out of me. I realized that the blood calling to blood nonsense she'd screamed was just that nonsense. Blood doesn't call to anything. Love calls to love. Responsibility calls to responsibility. We went inside, and for the next few hours, we just sat in the living room together. We didn't turn on the TV. We didn't check our phones. We just existed in the space we had built together. Sarah called a little later, her voice frantic, wanting to know if she had shown up. I told her what happened, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah sounded quiet, contemplative. "I really messed up, didn't I?" she whispered. "You did," I said, "but you're still my sister, and we're going to get through this. But Sarah, no more searching, not like this. If you want to find yourself, you have to look at the people who are actually standing next to you." The next few days were a blur of legal activity. Clara, the lawyer, moved with a speed that was almost terrifying. The cease and desist was delivered, and the paperwork for the restraining order was filed. We included the statements from Leo and the other siblings, as well as the evidence of the workplace harassment. It turns out that when you have a mountain of evidence and a victim who refuses to be intimidated, the legal system actually moves pretty fast. I also spent a lot of time looking at those photos of my father, the real biological father. I realized that I didn't have to choose between my adoptive parents and his memory. I could honor both. I could be the person my adoptive parents raised me to be while also carrying the knowledge that I was wanted from the very beginning. It changed the way I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't a leftover or a pawn. I was a person who had been loved by many, even if some of that love had been stolen away by a bitter woman. But there was one more thing I had to do. I had been thinking about the younger siblings, the ones that Leo had mentioned, the ones who were still living in the shadow of that woman's chaos. I knew I couldn't save them, and I knew I couldn't be their sister in the traditional sense, but I also knew I couldn't just walk away and pretend they didn't exist. I messaged Leo back. Thank you for everything I wrote. I've taken care of the legal side on my end. She shouldn't be bothering me anymore, but I want to know. How are the kids? Are they okay? Leo's reply came a few hours later. They're as okay as they can be. It's loud here. It's always loud, but they're tough. They see her for who she is, even the little ones. They're just waiting until they're old enough to get out just like I did. I looked at my bank account. I had worked hard, I had saved, and I was doing well. I wasn't going to give that woman a dime, not ever. But I thought about those kids sitting in a house filled with resentment and screaming, and I felt a pull in my chest that had nothing to do with blood. It was just human decency. I asked Leo for the name of a local youth center or a school supply drive in their area. I didn't want to send money directly to the house, she'd just take it. But I could make sure they had what they needed. I could be a shadow in their lives the same way my father had been forced to be a shadow in mine. I could provide a little bit of the stability that I had been lucky enough to receive. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were no big family dinners where everyone hugged and forgot the past. The biological mother was still out there, likely bitter and looking for her next target. My sister Sarah was still a hot mess who had a long road of healing ahead of her, and I still had a folder of harassment evidence that I'd have to keep for the rest of my life. But as I sat on my porch, a week later, watching the sun go down, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of the memories of the mother who read me bedtime stories, the father who stood in the driveway to protect me, and the man with the lopsided grin who never stopped looking for me. I realized that being family isn't a birthright. It's a choice you make every single day. It's in the way you show up, the way you stay, and the way you protect the people you love. The day of the court hearing for the restraining order felt like it was draped in a heavy gray fog, even though the sun was shining brightly outside. I remember standing in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my blazer, and feeling like I was preparing for a battle I should never have had to fight. My parents were downstairs, the quiet clinking of coffee mugs against the kitchen counter the only sound in the house. There was a strange, somber energy between us, a shared understanding that today wasn't just about a legal document. It was about officially and finally drawing a line in the sand between the life they had given me and the chaos I had been born into. The courthouse was one of those imposing limestone buildings that seems designed to make you feel small. As we walked through the metal detectors and down the echoing hallways, I felt a familiar surge of gratitude for the man walking beside me. My father looked solid, his presence a literal shield between me and the world. We met Claire, my lawyer, outside the courtroom. She looked sharp, her briefcase bursting with the folders of evidence we had meticulously gathered, the printed emails, the screenshots of the public, shaming the statements from the siblings who had lived through the reality of that woman's motherhood. "She's here," Claire whispered, nodding toward a bench further down the hall. I looked, and there she was. She wasn't in her beat-up car this time. She was sitting on a wooden bench wearing a floral dress that looked like it was meant to evoke a sense of wholesome motherliness. She had her hands folded in her lap, her head bowed as if she were in prayer. It was a performance through and through. She knew the power of optics. She was playing the part of the grieving, misunderstood mother, being bullied by her wealthy, ungrateful child. For a split second, I felt that old familiar tug of guilt, the what if that had haunted me for years. What if she really was just a woman who had fallen on hard times? What if I was being too harsh? But then she looked up. Our eyes met across the hallway, and the praying mother facade vanished in a heartbeat. Her eyes were hard, calculating, and filled with a cold, simmering resentment. There was no love there. There wasn't even curiosity. There was only the look of a person who had been outplayed and was looking for a way to flip the table. That look was all I needed to steady my heart. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and smelled of old paper and floor wax. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression, looked over the documents in silence for what felt like an eternity. I sat at the petitioner's table, my hands clasped tightly under the desk so no one could see them shaking. Across the aisle, the biological mother sat alone. She hadn't hired a lawyer. She was representing herself, a move that Claire had warned me was often a tactic to create more drama and direct confrontation. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up and her voice immediately cracked with practiced emotion. "Your Honor," she began, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "I just wanted to see my daughter. I've spent 20 years wondering where she was, praying for her safety. When she finally came back into my life, I thought it was a miracle. I'm a poor woman, Your Honor. I've struggled. I thought family helped each other. I didn't know that wanting a relationship with my own flesh and blood was a crime. She went on for 10 minutes weaving a story of poverty, sacrifice, and heartbreak. She painted me as a woman who had been brainwashed by my adoptive parents to hate my real origins. She even tried to claim that the money she had asked for was for a medical procedure for one of the younger children, a claim that Claire immediately debunked by presenting the text messages where she specifically mentioned her car and her shortage of funds for the month. Watching her lie so effortlessly was a chilling experience. It was like watching a master artisan at work, but instead of creating something beautiful, she was dismantling the truth piece by piece. She looked at me several times during her testimony, her expression switching between a pleading motherly gaze for the judge and a sharp mocking smirk for me when the judge wasn't looking. When it was Claire's turn, she didn't lead with emotion, she led with the facts. She presented the mass email to my workplace. She showed the public Facebook comments. She read aloud the statements from Leo and the other siblings detailing a long history of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. But the final blow came when Claire submitted the records of the biological father's attempts to gain custody. Your Honor, Claire said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, this isn't a story of a mother trying to reunite with a lost child. This is a story of a woman who has spent decades using people as pawns. She used this child to spite a father who wanted her, and now she is trying to use this adult woman to fund a lifestyle she cannot maintain herself. This is not motherhood. It is harassment. It is extortion. And it is a violation of the peace this family has spent 20 years building. The judge looked at the biological mother, then back at the documents. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind the bench. The evidence of workplace harassment and public defamation is quite clear, the judge finally said, and the statements from the other biological children suggest a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored. A mother-child relationship, whether biological or adoptive, does not grant a person the right to harass, extort, or publicly shame another individual. The request for the restraining order is granted. I felt a sudden, sharp intake of breath. It was over. The law had stepped in and built the wall I couldn't build on my own. I didn't feel like celebrating, though. I just felt empty. I watched as the biological mother was instructed on the terms of the order. No contact, no social media mentions, no approaching my home or workplace. She didn't cry this time. She just gathered her things, gave me one last hateful look, and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, already looking for her next move. As we walked out of the courthouse, the fresh air felt like a benediction. My parents were both visibly relieved, my mom leaning against my dad's shoulder as we reached the car. But I found myself looking toward the park across the street where a man was pushing a toddler on a swing. I thought about the man with the lopsided grin, my biological father. I thought about how he had walked these same types of hallways, probably sitting on the same uncomfortable benches, fighting a battle he was destined to lose because the system back then didn't know how to see past the mother's rights narrative. I want to find his grave, I said, suddenly turning to my parents. They both looked at me with a mix of surprise and understanding. Of course, my dad said. We'll help you find him. That afternoon, I didn't go back to work. I went home and sat in the quiet of my living room. I pulled out the letters Leo had sent, the ones my biological father had written to the agency and to the woman who had just been ordered to stay away from me. I read them slowly, savoring every word. He wasn't a perfect man, I'm sure. No one is. But in those letters, I saw a man who was desperate to be a father. I saw a man who had bought a crib and painted a room and picked out a name. He had called me Maya. Maya. It wasn't the name on my birth certificate or my driver's license, but it was a name that belonged to me nonetheless. It was a gift from a man I'd never known, a secret identity I'd carried without even knowing it. I realized that the biological mother hadn't just been trying to take my money. She had been trying to keep me from the truth of who I was. She wanted me to believe I was a burden she had discarded rather than a treasure she had stolen. By blocking her, I hadn't just protected my bank account. I had unlocked my history. I called Leo that evening. He was the only link I had left to that side of the world, a link that felt safe because he wanted nothing from me but the truth. The order went through, I told him. Good, he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. She's been on a rampage since she got back, screaming about how the system is rigged against her, but she'll move on eventually. She always finds a new obsession. Leo, I said, my voice quiet. Tell me about him. Tell me about my father. What was he really like? Not just the letters, but the man. There was a long pause on the other end. He was a builder, Leo said, his voice softening. He worked with his hands. He could fix anything. He used to come by the house sometimes when she wasn't there just to check on us, even though we weren't his. He'd bring us fruit or little toys. He had this way of looking at you like he was really seeing you. He was a good man, Maya, a really good man. Hearing him use that name, the name my father had given me, made my heart swell until it ached. I realized then that my story wasn't a tragedy. It was a story of survival. I had survived the woman who tried to use me, and I had been found by the people who truly loved me. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of my heart, I had finally found the man who had never stopped looking for me. Finding the grave of a man you never knew is a strange kind of pilgrimage. It's not like visiting a loved one where you can conjure up the sound of their laugh or the way they looked when they were tired. It's an exercise in imagination. You're mourning a ghost, a what if that was buried under 6 feet of earth before you even knew his name. It took a few weeks of digging through public records and a few more phone calls to Leo to find the exact location. He was buried in a small, slightly overgrown cemetery on the outskirts of the town where I was born. It wasn't a prestigious place, just a quiet patch of land bordered by a rusted chain-link fence and a row of ancient weeping willow trees. My real parents, offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to do alone. I needed to stand in that space without the weight of anyone else's expectations or comfort. The drive was long, taking me through winding back roads and past weather-beaten barns that looked like they were barely holding on. As I pulled into the gravel lot of the cemetery, the sun was beginning to hang low in the sky, casting long, spindly shadows across the headstones. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mown grass. I stepped out of the car, the silence of the place pressing in on my ears. I walked through the rows, my eyes scanning the names and dates. I saw families grouped together, generations of people who had lived and died in the same zip code. And then, near the back, under the shade of a massive oak tree, I found him. The headstone was simple. Just a small slab of gray granite. It gave his name, his birth date, and the year he died. But there was no epitaph, no beloved father, or dearly missed. It was just a name standing alone in the grass. It made my heart ache in a way I hadn't expected. He had died alone, or at least he had died without the recognition of the one person he had spent his life searching for. I sat down on the grass in front of the stone. I didn't cry at first. I just looked at the letters of his name, tracing them with my eyes. I thought about the letters he had written to the agency. I thought about the room he had painted and the crib he had bought. I thought about the man who brought toys to kids who weren't even his, just because he had a surplus of love with nowhere to put it. I'm here. I whispered the words, feeling small in the vast quiet of the cemetery. I'm here and I know the truth. I spent an hour there just talking to the air. I told him about my life. I told him about the parents who had raised me and how much he would have liked them. I told him about my job, my apartment, and the dog I was thinking about adopting. I told him that I was okay, that despite the chaos of my birth and the cruelty of the woman who had kept us apart, I had turned out all right. I wanted him to know that his fight hadn't been in vain. Even if he hadn't won the legal battle, the person he had fought for was standing there whole and strong. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small laminated copy of the photo Leo had sent me, the one of the man with the lopsided grin. I tucked it into the corner of the headstone, wedging it firmly into the earth. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. Using that word felt like a final act of rebellion against the woman who had tried to erase him. It was a recognition of a bond that biology had created but spite had tried to destroy. When I got back to the car, I felt lighter. The fog that had been hanging over me since that first text message on a Tuesday afternoon finally seemed to lift. I wasn't just an adopted kid anymore. I was a woman with a complicated history, yes, but also a woman with a clear sense of who she was. The drive home was different. I wasn't ruminating on the court case or the "I'm your mother" texts. I was thinking about the future. I had the restraining order in place, and Claire had assured me that any violation would result in immediate police intervention. The biological mother had gone quiet, at least for now. Leo told me she had moved on to a new project, some legal dispute with a former landlord. She was a shark. She had to keep moving, or she'd drown in her own bitterness. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Sarah's car parked at the curb. I sighed, leaning my head against the steering wheel for a moment. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another round of hot mess drama, but when I walked inside, the atmosphere was different. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom. There were no tears, no frantic gesturing. She looked tired, but she also looked present. She had started therapy a week ago, a condition my parents had set if they were going to continue helping her with her rent while she got back on her feet. "Hey," she said, looking up as I walked in. "How was it?" "It was good," I said, sitting down across from her. "It was peaceful." Sarah looked down at her coffee mug. "I'm really sorry, Maya." I froze. She had used the name. I looked at my mom, who gave me a small, knowing smile. "Leo told me," Sarah continued, her voice small. "He told me that was the name he picked for you. I thought it was important for you to hear it from me. I know I messed everything up. I know I was selfish and reckless. I was looking for a family because I didn't think I was good enough for this one. But seeing what you went through, seeing how mom and dad stood up for you, it made me realize that I already had what I was looking for. I just didn't know how to see it." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time in months that I felt like she was actually my sister again. "It's going to take a while, Sarah. I'm still angry, and I'm still hurt, but we're family, and we're going to figure it out. Life didn't go back to exactly how it was before. You can't unknow the things I learned. I still have the folder on my computer titled Evidence. I still have a momentary spike of anxiety whenever an unknown number flashes on my phone. But the "I'm your mother" texts have stopped. The Facebook comments have been deleted. The shadow has retreated. I've started a monthly donation to the youth center in Leo's neighborhood. I don't put my name on it and I don't ask for updates. It's just a way of honoring the biological siblings I'll probably never truly know and the father who would have wanted them to have a fighting chance. It's a way of taking the pain of my past and turning it into something quiet and productive. Sometimes I look at the man in the mirror, the one with the dark hair and the stubborn chin, and I see both of my fathers. I see the man who gave me his face and the man who gave me his life. I see the woman who gave me her biology and the woman who gave me her heart. It's a messy, complicated, beautiful mosaic of a life. But if there's one thing I've learned from this entire ordeal, it's that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build brick by brick through every feverish night, every difficult conversation, and every choice to stay when things get hard. Biology is a map, but love is the journey. I think about that woman sometimes, the one who thought she could buy my loyalty with a blood type. I hope she finds whatever it is she's actually looking for, but I know now that it's not me. I am not a paycheck, I am not a weapon, and I am not a leftover. I am a daughter, I am a sister, and for the first time in my life, I am completely unapologetically whole. It's funny how a single text message can derail your entire world only to lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like a piece of your puzzle was missing, I want you to remember this. You aren't defined by the people who let you go. You are defined by the people who held on. What would you do if a long-lost relative suddenly appeared in your life, not for a relationship but for a favor? Have you ever had to choose between the family you were born with and the family that chose you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing for more stories about the complicated, messy, and ultimately beautiful reality of what it means to be human. The days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, but the process of healing isn't a straight line. It's more like a tide that goes out and comes back in sometimes, bringing debris from the past back to the shore. Even with the legal protection and the physical distance, the emotional weight of what had happened lingered in the corners of our home. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, the silence of the house feeling heavy, my mind replaying that final encounter in the driveway or the cold, calculating look in that woman's eyes in the courtroom. I struggled with a strange kind of survivor's guilt. I looked at the life I had, the safety, the stability, the career, and then I thought about Leo and the other siblings still living in that cycle of chaos. I had been the one who got out, not because of anything I had done, but because of a choice made by a spiteful woman and the luck of being placed with the parents I had. It made me realize that adoption is often a story of one person's gain being built on the foundation of another person's loss. My gain was a loving family. My father's loss was a daughter he never got to hold. About 2 months after the court date, I received a package in the mail. It wasn't from the biological mother the restraining order was holding firm, but from Leo. Inside was a small, battered wooden box. There was a note on top that said, "I found this in the crawlspace of the old house. She was going to throw it out during her last cleaning spree. I think it belongs to you." I opened the box, and the scent of cedar and old paper wafted out. It was filled with more of my father's things. There was a silver watch that had stopped ticking years ago, a pair of worn leather work gloves, and a collection of cassette tapes. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized what they were. I found an old cassette player at a thrift store the next day, my hands shaking as I slotted the first tape in and pressed play. Static filled the room for a few seconds, and then a voice. It was deep, slightly raspy, with a gentle cadence that made me feel like I was being wrapped in a warm blanket. "Hi, Maya," the voice said. "It's June 14th. You're 3 months old today. I don't know where you are, and the lawyers tell me I shouldn't be making these tapes, but I don't care. I want you to know that I'm still here. I'm still looking. I bought you a teddy bear today, a big brown one with a blue ribbon. I'm keeping it in your room. It's waiting for you." I collapsed onto my sofa, the tears coming fast and hot. It was one thing to see his words on a page, but to hear his voice, to hear the love and the longing and the sheer stubborn hope in his tone, it changed everything. For the first time, I didn't feel like an adopted child. I felt like a person who was deeply, profoundly wanted. The tapes went on for years, him documenting his search, him talking about the dreams he had for me, him telling me about the weather or a funny thing that happened at work. He was talking to me through the decades, bridging the gap that spite had created. I realized then that the biological mother hadn't just tried to take my money. She had tried to keep me from this. She wanted me to believe that my biological history was a void of neglect, because if I believed that, I'd be easier to manipulate. But these tapes were the ultimate evidence of her failure. She could take his rights, she could take his time, but she couldn't take the fact that he loved me. A few weeks later, I invited Leo to come visit. He had never been out of his home state, and he was nervous about the drive, but he arrived on a Saturday afternoon. His old truck rumbled into our driveway. When he stepped out, my parents were there to meet him. It was a moment I had played over in my head 1,000 times, wondering if it would be awkward or tense. But my father, my adoptive father, walked right up to Leo and shook his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for looking out for her. Thank you for giving her back her history." Leo stayed for the weekend, and it was one of the most healing experiences of my life. We sat in the backyard grilling burgers and talking late into the night. We talked about the biological mother, not with anger anymore, but with a weary kind of understanding. We talked about the other siblings and the ways we could help them without letting her back into our lives. Leo told me stories about our father that weren't in the tapes, how he loved classic rock, how he could fix any engine just by listening to it, and how he never once spoke a bitter word about me, even when the search felt hopeless. For the first time, my two worlds didn't feel like they were at war. They felt like they were finally shaking hands. My adoptive parents didn't feel threatened. They felt grateful that I had found another piece of myself. And Leo didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like a brother. Sarah joined us for dinner on Sunday, and she was quieter than usual, watching the interaction between me and Leo with a thoughtful expression. Later, when we were cleaning up in the kitchen, she leaned over and whispered, "I think I get it now. It wasn't about finding better people, it was just about finding the truth." I hugged her, and for the first time in years, the hug felt real. It wasn't a hot mess seeking validation, it was a sister offering support. The aftermath of everything, the text, the workplace scandal, the court case, it had all been a trial by fire. But as I watched Leo drive away on Monday morning, I realized that the fire hadn't consumed me. It had just burned away the illusions. I was left with a life that was sturdier, truer, and more filled with love than I had ever imagined. The biological mother eventually stopped trying to bypass the restraining order. From what Leo tells me, she's found someone else to blame for her problems, a new target for her grievances. That's the tragedy of people like her. They spend their whole lives looking for someone else to carry their burdens, never realizing that the only thing keeping them down is their own refusal to love. I still have the cassettes. On the nights when the world feels loud or the old questions try to creep back in, I put one in and listen to the voice of the man who never gave up. He's not a ghost anymore, he's a part of me. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that he would be proud of the woman I've become. I'm Maya. And I'm also the woman my parents raised. I'm a marketing professional, a sister, a daughter, and a survivor. I'm the result of 1,000 choices, some made out of malice, and some made out of the purest kind of love. And for the first time, I wouldn't change a single one of them. 1 year. It's a strange milestone to reach when you've been through an emotional earthquake. They say time heals all wounds, but I think that's a bit of a simplification. Time doesn't just knit the skin back together, it gives you the distance to look at the scars and realize they're part of a pattern you finally understand. A year after that final drive away from the courthouse, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt quieter, more deliberate, and infinitely more honest. The constant hum of anxiety that had defined those first few months of the biological invasion had finally faded into the background, replaced by a steady, solid sense of peace. I remember sitting on my back porch on a warm autumn evening, the air smelling of dry leaves and wood smoke. I had a photo album in my lap, not a digital one, but a real physical book with plastic sleeves. In it, I had started a new section. It began with the grainy Polaroid of the man with the lopsided grin. Next to it was a photo of Leo and me from his visit, both of us squinting into the sun and looking remarkably alike. And on the facing page were photos of my parents, the ones who had stayed, and my sister Sarah. Sarah was doing better. Truly better. The hot mess phase hadn't ended overnight, but the therapy had given her the tools to stop looking for her worth in the eyes of strangers. She had stopped scrolling through genealogy sites and started focusing on her own career in graphic design. She still had her moments of insecurity, but she didn't try to fix them by breaking into other people's lives anymore. We had reached a new kind of sisterhood, one built on a shared survival of the chaos she had accidentally invited. We didn't talk about the biological mother much anymore. She had become a Voldemort figure in our house, not out of fear, but because we simply didn't want to give her the oxygen of our attention. The last I heard from Leo, the biological mother had moved 2 states away. She had apparently found a new man, someone she described as a soulmate, who was going to help her get back what she was owed. It was the same old script, just a different audience. Leo had finally moved out of that house for good, taking the younger siblings with him when he could, or at least providing a safe harbor for them on the weekends. He told me she didn't talk about me anymore. In her mind, I had become the villain who had betrayed her a story she told to garner sympathy from her new circle. It was a role I was perfectly happy to play as long as it meant she stayed on the other side of that restraining order. I think about the phrase, "I'm your mother," a lot. It's funny how 3 little words can hold so much weight and yet be so hollow when they aren't backed up by action. To her, it was a title of ownership, a deed to a property she had abandoned but still wanted to collect rent on. To me, it's a title that has to be lived into every single day. I see it in the way my mom still calls me every Sunday just to hear my voice. I see it in the way she looked at me in that courtroom ready to fight the world for a child she didn't give birth to, but whom she had spent 25 years loving. Biology is a fact, but family is an act of will. One afternoon, I went back to the cemetery where my biological father was buried. This time I didn't go alone. I brought my parents. I was worried it might be awkward, that they might feel like they were being replaced, or that I was searching for something they couldn't give me. But as we stood in front of that small granite stone, my dad put his arm around my shoulder and my mom reached out and placed a bouquet of fresh flowers on the grass. "He did a good job," my dad whispered, looking at the stone. "He gave us the best thing that ever happened to our lives." I realized then that there was no competition. There was no real family versus fake family. There was just the people who loved me. My biological father had loved me with a fierce protective hope that spanned decades. My adoptive parents had loved me with a steady daily devotion that had built the very foundation of who I was. And even Leo, in his own way, had loved me by choosing truth over loyalty to a toxic mother. I looked at the stone and I didn't feel the grief I had felt the first time. I felt a sense of completion. I had reclaimed the name Maya, but I was still the daughter they had raised. I was both, and that was okay. I wasn't a puzzle with a missing piece. I was a whole person with a larger history than I had once realized. The drum roll moment that had started this whole ordeal, the text asking for money, it seemed like a lifetime ago. It had been the catalyst for a total dismantling of my life, but in the rubble, I had found the things that actually mattered. I had learned how to set boundaries that were unbreakable. I had learned that the people who share your blood aren't always the people who share your soul. And I had learned that the most powerful thing you can say to someone who tries to use you is no. As we walked back to the car that day, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the quiet cemetery. I felt a deep, resonant sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the closed adoption that had protected me during my most vulnerable years. Gratitude for a brother who was brave enough to tell the truth. Gratitude for a father who never stopped looking, and for the parents who never let go. The journey of an adopted child is often painted as a search for an origin, a quest to find out where we came from. But I think the real journey is learning how to be at home in the life you have. It's realizing that the people who read you the bedtime stories and held your hand through the breakups are the ones who truly own the titles of mother and father. I still have that folder of evidence on my computer. I keep it not because I'm afraid, but as a reminder that my peace was earned, a reminder that I am worth protecting, and a reminder that the word family is a sacred thing, not a weapon to be used for a paycheck. I'm Maya. I'm a daughter, a sister, and a woman who knows her worth. And for the first time in my life, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a mystery. I see a legacy of love, complicated and messy as it may be. In a world where we can choose who we call family, I want to ask you, who is the person who showed up for you when you didn't have to ask? What does the word family mean to you in your own life? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand to protect the people who actually care for you? Share your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and it's a constant reminder that we are all part of a larger story of resilience and love. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing for more narratives about the incredible, challenging, and beautiful journey of finding where we truly belong. I walked back into my house that evening, the lights warm in the windows. I sat down at the table with my parents and my sister, the sound of laughter filling the room. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was mine, and it was exactly where I was meant to be.